A few weeks ago, a tragic diving incident in the Maldives claimed the lives of 6 people and started a worldwide media frenzy. As former Maldives diving professionals, we've been following the reports closely, and the amount of misinformation is staggering. So today we're debunking 7 of the biggest media myths surrounding this incident. Media myth number 1 is perhaps the most irresponsible narrative we've seen, which is the repeated use of the term shark-infested cave. Since the site where the divers were found is locally known as Shark Cave, the headlines have twisted this name out of context and used it to portray this site as a deadly trap. We've even had viewers commenting that caves can have aggressive sharks. There are several things wrong with this. Firstly, in the diving world, all sites are given names, but just as a place called Manta Bay doesn't guarantee manta sightings, Shark Cave doesn't mean a site is infested. Having worked as divers in the Maldives for several years, we've dived around Vavu Atoll many times. For us, sharks are the main attraction, not a deterrent. Divers travel across the world to see the grey reefs, white tips and nurse sharks that call these reefs and channels their home. They're indifferent to divers and, being mostly nocturnal, they occasionally seek shelter in overhangs to rest during the day. Divers and ocean lovers do not fear seeing sharks. We fear not seeing sharks. By using the term infested, a word reserved for pests and vermin, these headlines contribute to a misunderstanding of the ocean and demonises an animal that is already being slaughtered by humans at a rate of hundreds of millions per year. Watch this video next if you want a first-hand look into just how bad this issue really is. This narrative is not just wrong, it's an insult to the conservation work being done to help protect these essential creatures. The next theory is probably the silliest we've come across. Several mainstream headlines have suggested that the divers' choice of wetsuits was behind the tragedy. We clicked on these reports to find a single quote from an anonymous source stating, "This is not the appropriate type of wetsuit used for deep sea diving." This is a classic example of taking a technical truth and stripping it of all context, creating an entire story around a single statement. For divers, a wetsuit is for thermal and exposure protection. The choice is largely subjective, depending on the individual and the environment. It's true that cave, technical and deep divers often prefer thicker wetsuits or dry suits on multi-hour deep dives, but these were recreational divers in the Maldives where a 3 to 5mm wetsuit is perfectly appropriate for the usual 30-metre, 60-minute limits. The only way a wetsuit could be blamed for this incident is if the divers had suffered from extreme hypothermia or a catastrophic buoyancy error. A wetsuit cannot realistically be considered a primary safety factor in most scenarios. By focusing on the wrong suit, the media distracts from the real issue, which was the decision to ignore local laws and personal limits. Myth number 3 is probably the most misunderstood outside of the diving community. It's the theory that nitrogen narcosis could have been the primary cause of this incident. The narrative suggests that the entire group of divers became drunk on nitrogen, causing them to lose their minds and dive to depths beyond 50 metres on recreational scuba gear and into a cave they never returned from. But to any level of diver, this theory is absurd. Gas narcosis is an effect caused by breathing compressed air at depth. Whilst it is often likened to being drunk, hence the term the Martini Effect, the reports that say it's like you've had one drink for every 15 metres is a massive exaggeration. In reality, being narked is rarely felt until around 30 metres. It's one of the main reasons recreational diving is capped at 40 metres. Every diver is taught the golden rule of narcosis. If you feel any symptoms, you simply ascend a little bit until they disappear. It's a mild and easily manageable condition, not an uncontrollable state of insanity. Whilst narcosis would have been a factor at the depths that these divers reached, it cannot be the main cause. For this theory to be true, a group of 5 divers, including instructors with thousands of hours in the water, would have had to all experience extreme symptoms from a depth of around 30 meters. They would all have to ignore their basic training to ascend to relieve the symptoms, and all decide to continue deeper into a cave. It's a story that ignores obvious errors in favour of a sensationalised narrative. Myth number 4 is a common theory that circulated for a while, and is something we considered when we first heard about the incident. Diving in the Maldives is known for strong currents, especially around the can-dos or channels. For a while, we debated the idea that a strong down current could have pulled the divers from safe depths towards the cave. And then more elaborate theories emerged, suggesting that a Venturi Effect could have sucked the divers into the cave. A freak accident like this seemed like the only viable alternative to the idea that it was simply down to very poor planning and a disregard for training and the rules. But this theory can now be debunked with a couple of explanations. One of the Finnish divers that was part of the recovery operation confirmed that the currents around and inside the cave are simply not strong enough to have sucked anyone inside. Furthermore, a Venturi suction effect requires a tunnel with an inlet and outlet, which does not apply to a dead-end chamber. It makes this explanation physically impossible. The headlines portray it as a sudden freak current that appeared out of nowhere like an underwater tornado. Having dived professionally in the Maldives and other strong current dive destinations, we know that although currents can be strong, their timing, strength and direction are predictable. With experience, guides and instructors can reliably plan and adjust the dives according to the current. It makes the possibility of being caught off guard by a sudden freak current highly unlikely. Down currents could have been present and caused the divers to descend uncontrollably, but this does not explain why they were found so deep inside the cave. So, although currents around these can-dos in the Maldives are inevitable, when looking at the evidence available and speaking from experience, it's almost impossible to explain the incident with a sudden freak current or the Venturi effect. Myth number 5 is one of the first theories that emerged. Many articles mentioned equipment failures like faulty regulators, exploding tanks and bad air as being the primary cause. In reality, modern scuba gear is incredibly robust and reliable with very few points of failure. Any equipment malfunctions are usually minor and manageable, and they do not lead to fatality when correct procedures are followed. The bad air theory is equally flawed. Whilst air contamination is a risk that exists, divers are trained to test their air prior to any dive to check for any bad taste or smell. It's very unlikely that all 5 divers could have suffered a fatal equipment malfunction, or that they all had bad air with none of them noticing this in their pre-dive safety checks. Myth 6 stays on the topic of equipment. Many articles have oversimplified the diver's use of unsuitable training and equipment. Whilst it is true that technical deep and cave diving require specific training, planning and equipment to be done safely, to claim that the divers would have been fine if they'd all been diving on rebreathers or trimix is ignoring a lot of crucial details. Firstly, you need to understand that diving in the Maldives beyond 30 meters and technical decompression diving is illegal, unless in rare cases you are granted permission from local authorities. CCR, cave and trimix diving all fall under this bracket. These regulations exist for a reason. In a country that is 99% water and only 1% landmass, emergency evacuation for divers is challenging. The 30-meter limit exists to remove the high-risk variables of technical diving. To suggest that the divers should have had technical gear or been cave trained is to suggest that they should have broken even more laws than they already were, in a place where emergency treatment can be hours away by a speedboat or seaplane. Whilst rebreathers and trimix diving allow for extended bottom times and greater depth, they are not fix-all solutions that remove the risks of normal diving. If anything, they just introduce new risks. Rebreathers are complex with many more points of failure than recreational scuba gear, and decompression diving on trimix requires meticulous planning. The question should not be, why were they not laying lines and using tech gear? It should be, why were they doing this in the first place? The final narrative we want to break down is perhaps the most important piece that ties everything together. Headlines have repeatedly used the phrase experienced divers. But this is missing vital context that many of our viewers have pointed out in the comments. Diving is a multifaceted sport with many disciplines, each requiring specific skills and training. The narrative uses the word experienced as a mask to say, if it could happen to them, it could happen to anyone. But it ignores one of the biggest takeaways: personal responsibility and the dangers of exceeding personal limits. The key takeaway should be that this was a dive that never should have happened the way it did. With proper permissions, equipment, training and planning, this dive could have been conducted safely, just as millions of dives are conducted safely every year. We've had comments from viewers asking if this incident could affect diving regulations worldwide. Our response is that the regulations already exist, and this is a perfect example of why they need to be followed. We hope that this video has helped clear up some of the confusion around the incident for both divers and non-divers. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let us know if there's anything we've missed or if you've seen any other examples of misinformation about diving. In the next video, we're dropping the serious themes for a while and getting back in the water. We hope to see you there.